us a lot of advice around, getting reliable, good sleep, avoiding alcohol, avoiding sugar and refined foods, making sure we exercise, different types of supplements we could take, just like things that we could do to stay healthy. And I think we all really try our hardest to do those things the best we can. But on the other hand, our aspirations sometimes just hit bad habits, and it's like hard to do these things. So personally, like I've noticed on the grocery runs, I send my wife out for tons of donuts, and I also end up drinking like 4 or 5 cups of coffee a day. This is a lot more than usual, so I'm like trying to deal with being shut in by just like amping up the sugar and caffeine.
Mhm.
So I think a question for you is, like, how do we deal with this? Like, we sort of have these aspirations, maybe not to do these things that in the end are like harmful longer term, but in the short
Mhm.
term they feel good.
Sure.
What are your tips for like just managing, staying away from the like bad habits or like things we just do in self isolation, to try to deal with it?
Yeah, it's definitely an important question. So first of all, what I like to try to do because is to change the idea of using the words good and bad. And it's very critical because oftentimes a lot of us, what I've noticed when I'm working with a lot of my patients is people feeling like there's a tendency to feel guilt and or shame, especially as we're isolating. Those are common feelings to have because those are our social emotions. Those are the ones that develop through our social engagements. And when things are rough and when things are tough and we're isolating ourselves, there's this propensity to feel more guilt and shame. And I've seen it in a lot of my clients and working on that. So one of the things we do is be careful with the words that we use. And it may seem almost nitpicky, but it's important. So when we look at things as bad, it has a moralistic quality. And it's often like, and then you feel like kind of guilty afterwards. Maybe you have your donuts. And then you feel like, then not only you maybe felt good in the moment when you're eating it and you get that self-soothing, then how do you feel an hour after those donuts? How did you feel 2 hours after those donuts? So the idea is not to create kind of a rule, because if you start working on what we call rule governed behavior, it's inflexible, and generally we don't follow it. Kind of like a little bit of an adjacent thing is that most portion controlled diets, for instance, 98% failure rate after about 2 years. Mostly people return back to their normal or even gain more because it's not adaptive. So what we want to do is just be able to start to educate ourselves on how it feels. So oftentimes when you having those donuts, I would say like, don't stop eating it. All right, well, what do you feel like an hour afterwards? What do you feel like 2 hours afterwards? And that kind of thing. Just start highlighting in your own brain the after effects, the consequences of that. And how do you feel? Do you feel strong? Do you feel healthy? Do you feel like you want to take on more? Or, do you experience these sort of more unhealthier kind of states and that kind of thing? And the more you bring your mind with that and be conscious of it, you don't have to whip yourself. It'll actually naturally your brain will start to piece it together, and you'll start to naturally make better choices, healthier choices overall.
Yeah, that's really good. I've noticed with the sugar high, later in the day, I just have this awful like, I don't know, like a feeling like I ate just too much sugar and I like regret it. So maybe
Hmm.
spending some more time on that. Wonder if there's also, like you mentioned, guilt. I see a lot of people, and I put myself in this bucket too. There's some guilt around productivity.
Hmm.
We're home. It feels like we should have a lot of time for projects.
Hmm.
Maybe there's also conflicts between the amount of work we can do for home if we have that type of job, and then also duties with kids or just keeping the house clean and dealing with a partner.
Hmm.
Um, what do you have? Do you have any tips for like guilt around this feeling like we should be more productive during this time?
Yeah, and that is if you're feeling like the guilt, and sometimes guilt and anxiety are kind of very similar to each other. And oftentimes, like when we feel guilt, what's a helpful thing to understand is that you wouldn't feel guilt unless some part of you cared. So what I generally recommend when people are working with guilt in different situations, what you want to do is like, all right, you wouldn't feel guilty if you didn't give a shit. So the reason why you do feel guilty, because there's something that you do care about, and yet there's an action or something that you're doing or not doing that maybe kind of missing the mark on what you value.